Hello, can you hear me? Great. It's great to be here, and good morning, everybody. This has been an incredible week, and on behalf of Veranex, we're thrilled to support LSI. I think we've been here from the inception, and after this week, I think it's accurate to say that LSI is creating the epicenter of medtech right here this week in particular. And speaking of which, we have this amazing panel. We're going to be talking about innovation, fueling it, powering it up. And I thought that what we could do is kick off with some introductions. If you want to quickly introduce yourself, maybe quickly frame how digital is at your organization, and then share something that's fueling digital innovation at your organization.
Hi, everybody. I'm Josh Makower. I'm the director of Stanford Biodesign and professor of medicine and bioengineering, and also special partner with NEA and the executive chairman of ExploreMed. At Biodesign, digital is integrated into every thought pattern as we try to figure out how to think about solving solutions, solving problems. We have an active digital course, which is really kind of interesting. And in terms of things that are fueling innovation, the team has come up with a really interesting open source product called Cardinal Kit, which actually provides a lot of the basic modules that allow anyone to build their own digital health solutions. So deals with HIPAA, deals with cloud storage, and a whole bunch of other issues that are typical for digital health solutions. So it's a nice way to enable the ecosystem.
I'm Todd, Brinton. I'm an interventional cardiologist. I'm currently the chief scientific officer at Edwards Lifesciences. I spent a long time, 20 years at Stanford, 15 years as the fellowship director for Stanford Biodesign prior to moving to industry. Been an entrepreneur, started a number of companies, was an engineer originally before I went back to medical school. So I'll probably take a little bit of the con argument here in the sense that digital is incredibly powerful. I just have a difficult time defining what digital is. Digital is everything to everyone depending on what you want it to be. We clearly, I think it's a very powerful tool, incredibly powerful tool, but I also think mechanical, electrical, biological, all these are very powerful solution tools, and I think it's just the context of what problem you're trying to solve. We definitely have use digital platforms at Edwards. Probably the most obvious is we have an entire business of predictive analytics in the critical care space. We have an entire team of algorithms of all sorts of AI, ML technology that we're using for that. We're now starting to look at it and cross over some of thinking about what we can use it for in our cardiac implants business. But I look at it a little bit more as it's a very powerful tool, but it's not the end all be all. And I would tell you that the number of businesses, one of my responsibilities is looking at businesses outside of Edwards. We evaluate, and the number of things I look at that say, we've got a problem, we got all this data, and we're going to tell you eventually what product we're going to create with AI, ML, it's going to solve everything for you. I'd just like to know what it is. Because I think you have to define what we're talking about. So that's my position.
All right, this is going to be a great panel. So hi, I'm Joe Smith, and much of what he said, I just wanted to say ditto. So started off life as a geeky engineer, became a geeky cardiologist, interventional electrophysiologist, and have had worked in big companies, like Boston Scientific and J&J, and some small companies. I built 2 little digital healthcare companies and sold them, and so someone found value in them. And for the last 17 months, I've been the chief science officer for Becton Dickinson. And BD, if you don't know it, I completely understand it because we've mastered, I think, stealth marketing. So 77,000 people last year. We shipped 45 billion products into healthcare. several million of those are smart and connected products. And so I look at what we might call digital innovation as the opportunity to take, it's often said, it's taking data, turning it into insights, first to information and then to insights, and then give that to the clinicians. And I view that as almost enough, because if you spend any time in a critical care environment, where I think we've both lived at different times, what you find is that in the average ICU, there are 40 devices that are giving alarms to the tune of 700 per person per day. And we are looking at feeding the busiest clinicians in the world with more data than they could possibly deal with. And so the way I look at where digital can go is it's not just stopping at the insights, but it's actually closing the loop and making care a good deal more automatic. We've been able to do this with some simple things. We've got now closed loop control for insulin pumps, but if we think Elon Musk is doing a good job in getting self-driving cars, we need a little bit more automaticity, a little bit more closed loop control in healthcare so we can take some of the burden off of the busiest people in healthcare.
Okay, wow. So my name's Atul Butte. I'm a computer scientist, pediatric endocrinologist, a professor and an entrepreneur at the University of California. And I gave the keynote 2 days ago, so I'm not going to rehash all of that, but the University of California is huge. We have a little Cal Stanford thing going here on stage, so that on top of everything else.
Hey, 3 of us are from MIT.
We have
Come on.
plenty to argue from. We'll be arguing here, and that makes a good panel. But obviously, University of California starts up companies, and you've heard of Genentech and a couple of our startups. But I represent the umbrella over the health organization, University of California Health, or UC Health. We have all 6 academic health centers all working together now, so it's UCSF, UCLA, Irvine, Davis, San Diego, and Riverside. And I, in particular, am the chief data scientist over that whole umbrella. So, and I'll be talking about one flavor of digital, the electronic health records, which I said 2 days ago are so old, they're new again. And we have all this data captured on every single thing we do and measure on a patient. At UC, we have 9 million patients over the past 11 years. 50 million devices have been used. And like I said, we track every screw of every kit of every device we implant because we know how to bill for those. And where I'm having fun is translating real-world data into real-world evidence. And yeah, we have a lot of data, but that's why we have artificial intelligence and ML, and that's coming along the way too. So I'm looking forward to this panel.
Great. Well, I'm Gretchen Purcell Jackson. I like to think of myself as a simple country surgeon. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, although I did do 12 years at Stanford as an undergraduate in engineering med school and then a PhD in biomedical informatics in the same place that Atul trained. I'm a surgeon and a scientist, and I spent 12 years as an academic clinician scientist at Vanderbilt. I still practice pediatric surgery part-time there. And then I went and joined IBM Watson Health as their chief science officer and their chief health officer, and I now work at Intuitive Surgical on scientific strategy. Intuitive, as many of you know, is best known for the Da Vinci robot, the robotics platform, and I work for the digital part of our organization. So we think of digital as everything that you can put into the robotics platform, so 3D models, imaging guidance, even AI, like don't cut that, or everything that we get out of the robotics platform. And to be clear, Intuitive was born digital, so we have always had sophisticated software along with the hardware devices that help with maintenance and monitoring to ensure that the device is reliably available. But we also know everything about what happens during surgery, so everything. So what instruments are used, how long a particular task takes, how much a surgeon turns their wrist when they are sewing something. And what I am most excited about is that that data can really allow us to understand what makes surgery safe and what makes surgery effective. So a lot of work has been done around surgical quality, and most of that has focused on patient factors or disease factors, like is the patient obese, or do they have poorly controlled diabetes, or do they have stage 4 cancer, so the surgery is going to be much more difficult, or it is focused on very simplistic surgeon or institutional factors. How long has the surgeon been in practice? Is this a high volume center of excellence? When we know exactly what happens during an operation, we can start to associate what happens during an operation and the insights from that with clinical outcomes. And that is really exciting. And we are just starting to scratch the surface of understanding that. But in understanding that, we are starting to see signals that the objective metrics of what happens during surgery are much stronger predictors of clinical outcomes than patient factors or disease factors.
So clearly, we have the right people on the stage to discuss this topic. So you started to hint at this, Joe, about the data, flood of data, speaking of the weather. And we have a lot of data coming in. How are these healthcare systems, the hospitals, the physicians, the nurses, how are they going to manage it all? What's this all coming to? And Atul, I think you also have a point of view. I think we all have a point of view on this.
You start, Joe.
Yes, so just putting together a little bit of math, right? So there are, I think, 20,000 plus drugs that the FDA recognizes. There's, I think, 6,700 medical device categories. There are 190 professional societies that the American Medical Association recognizes, giving rise to, I think, a little bit more than 3,700 professional society guidelines, each of which has multiple recommendations about diagnostic and therapeutic approaches that one should take to specific patient groups. In addition to that, PubMed produces, I think, 1.3 million new publications every year that are many times relevant to individual clinical states and their treatment. 30% of all data generated today is healthcare data, and it's growing at a compound annual rate of 35%. And so if you put that into context with the fact that we are living through an unprecedented staffing shortage in hospitals, a liquidity challenge for hospitals, 50% of them ran red last year, and an aging population where in 2035, I think we will see the first inversion of the pyramid with people over age 65 outnumbering people under 18. It is unclear how we can expect any clinician to provide best care when they have to integrate all that information on their own. The bandwidth of the individual does not afford an opportunity to integrate the information they're confronted with to do a decent job. And that's been relevant for a while. You know, just getting guidelines-based care in a hospital in the US, you've got a 50-50 chance of getting guidelines-based care with even simple conditions. And so I think the opportunity for digital and technology in general is to integrate that information for you and make the decisions as well they can, and we should not force people to do things that machines can do better. And so I'm really quite optimistic that we will have the technological kind of backbone to be able to do this. We need some regulatory facility in making sure that can happen, but I'm really quite optimistic that we can close what used to be a no-do gap, and now it's a could know, don't know, then can't do gap. I think there's a real opportunity in front of us, but I would like to see us move there instead of where we are today, which is we make a new gadget and it signals an alarm to a learned intermediary who, you know, while that regulatory framework makes sense to some, it doesn't clinically operate. I mean, we have smart nurses, great doctors turning off those alarms because they're just overwhelmed with it.
I don't know how much more I can add to that great statement there, but a couple points. So first of all, we've always had filters, right? I mean, not every doc goes to pathology to see the slide, right? They rely on the report. So we've always had data going through filters, going through some kind of process, going to, let's say, a frontline clinician. That's not going to change. More of that's going to be digital. More of that's going to be AI and machine learning driven computer assistants. I want to also echo the fact that, you know, in the early days, let's say 4 years ago, we were more worried about AI replacing doctors. Whereas that worry still could be there, I think it's turned completely around where we're having trouble recruiting doctors in certain fields. And maybe it's cause effect, right? Where radiology trainees don't necessarily want to go into chest radiology because they can see that future coming, right? And now all of a sudden we need the AI because we can't hire enough chest radiologists. So it's turned completely on its end. It's a very important point to realize the narrative has changed there. One more point, though, about AI, and of course, I mentioned ChatGPT and all the likes of that. I think there is going to be a big kind of fork in the road here. And the fork is whether AI is going to help us with the drudgery of healthcare or the cognitive part of healthcare. I think we physicians are thinking wishfully that it's going to help us with the drudgery. Can you fill out prior auth forms and these kinds of things you see on Twitter? And what happens when it's the cognitive side? And it's going to be both, of course. That's how these things happen. But boy, off-the-shelf tools are pretty amazing as is. So it's a great time.
I mean, I'm going to share a vision of what I hope healthcare looks like with digital in the future. It's a 4-level system. The first level, if you're not feeling well, you open up your iPhone or Android, and you describe your symptoms to a completely autonomous interface that diagnoses you and provides you with a certain level of treatments unless it determines that you need to be escalated. And you get that information within seconds. Your drug or what have you that you need is triggered automatically from your pharmacy, and it winds up at your house within the next couple of hours. And the majority of interactions that many of us have for well care or slightly less than well care, including other even conditions like COVID, where you need your Paxlovid subscription or what have you, all instantaneous, delivered without a single human ever touching it. That's level 1. We're going to love that. It sounds scary, but doctors are going to love it too, because they just don't want that lifestyle. I mean, this is not a good lifestyle to have to do that all the time. So that layer is going to be taken away by AI, and it requires regulatory change, but that's level 1. Level 2 is you just don't sort of feel comfortable with what the bot told you. You want to talk to a human. You push another button, and instantaneously someone on telehealth is communicating with you. They're sitting somewhere, in Hawaii, and they're giving you their advice. But at least you've talked to a human now, and now that person similarly either validates what the chatbot said or, further escalates you to the level 3 area, which is that you go to now actually see someone. So, 3 levels in, you're now going to go into a physician's office. Most people aren't ever want to go. Who wants to go shop for things that they could get on Amazon, in the store? We don't do it. It's the same exact mentality. And of course, the last level is a specialist in some sort of operative or procedural thing, which is also way down the road. And, to the extent that that becomes more accessible, it gains access for people who don't have access. So all you need is basically a cell phone to be able to get the majority of the care that you need, which really is going to, improve costs. People are going to be able to get access to care earlier, and their threshold for, obtaining care will be lower. But the cost of it will be nominally almost zero because it's all digital. So that's how I see the future. I think it requires regulatory change, but I hope and I believe that is possible.
I think we just answered the question about cognitive, though, right? I think it's going to go cognitive. That's going cognitive, right? There's decision making. It's going to be process. It's going to be a process, right? It's going to transition from kind of the need for labor reduction to potentially.
That's true, but of course, with that computer doing all those things, it's not like, hey, human, would you fill out this form? I mean, it's also doing the form filling out, but it's so it's taking that part too.
So it starts there.
Yeah, right.
Go ahead.
I think my perspective on this data deluge is very consistent with the vision that you have, that sort of layered vision. And I think part of the problem with this notion of the deluge is that we are taking all the data and the information that we have and dumping it on those filters that you talked about. And so saying, okay, here you go, physician, here's all this information, now make a decision. And I think there are 2 problems with that. Part of the reason I went to industry was I was a frustrated academic clinician that knew that there was all the information that I needed to make really good decisions was out there, yet it wasn't getting to me. And so one of the roles I think we have when we are digital companies, or the digital parts of our companies, is to take that data, the data that we have and perhaps the insights, but even the raw data, and deliver it back to the ecosystem. Deliver it to all the stakeholders who even may have part ownership of that, and allow them to use it. So not to necessarily be the filter. There are probably too many filters these days, but to democratize it and give it in part to, of course, the clinicians, but maybe the payers, maybe the patients themselves.
God forbid.
And what?
I said, God forbid, but go on.
God forbid, no. Well, and it was only yesterday, which maybe it was a decade or so ago, when people were super worried about patients and families hurting themselves if they had access to health information, and it's really borne out that they haven't hurt themselves if we can give them. But I think part of our role is actually to democratize that information, not necessarily be the people who are making the final ruling on it.
So if I can quickly respond, as much as I would love to vehemently argue against Josh right now, it's not even the future. I think that some of what he's saying is the present, actually, right? So you have Amazon Care, or whatever they called it before they pulled the plug, where the virtual visit within 60 seconds of opening the app. You have virtual first plans. And it's funny, because 5 or 10 years ago, I think physicians would have argued, how dare you do this without a physical exam? And then with telemedicine, we've done this to ourselves, right? And how much care we deliver with telemedicine, now within 60 seconds. I wish that doc were in Hawaii answering that, but probably they're going to be in a call center, merited and measured on how many they're doing per hour. And so you're painting a pretty picture for the doc here. I don't think it's going to go that way.
Sell it,
Okay, but to create this ecosystem, you got to share the data, right? You got to have these systems. But I think there are going to be walls and lines where, health systems, and I'm I guess representing providers here, and not all providers are going to want to share data with all participants in the ecosystems, right? Of course, we want to share data with patients. That's a no-brainer. And by the way, it's federal law. But of course, we want to share data with patients. But with payers, I think it's a different story. And I think that we can go into more depth there. But that's going to be kicking and screaming, I think, regardless of what you believe in transparency and all.
Go ahead.
I think what we're talking about here, though, is a system, right? And not just a technology. And so what Josh is talking about requires a system, right, to actually be integrated and connected and to be able to move freely to then ultimately, and we live in a very siloed system, right? We have different healthcare plans, fee for service, some are more, so how do you bring that all together is the challenge. And that's going to be a big leap for us to actually bring all this stuff together. I think it's going to happen, I'm not saying, but the question is, how do we do that? Let me give you another analogy, which is, if you look at where we are right now, the number of things that I see, some really brilliant algorithms and technology that are out there, really very insightful. But the first thing I ask myself is, this is great. How are we going to connect it? How am I going to get access to it? And the things that are most valuable are the organizations coming saying, we're already piped into 130,000 patients or 130 hospitals. Now we have the ability to pull this stuff together and make decisions. But by the way, if you don't belong to that system, you don't get any of that stuff. Mm-hmm. So how does that stuff all get connected? That's the way we're going to make that probably the reality.
I'm going to argue against that slightly, because I think there'll be systems. First of all, let me be completely chaotic evil on stage here and say there is no healthcare system, right? We have a whole bunch of two-way contracts with each other. That equals a healthcare system, right? So there's no real system here. But I think we're going to have, maybe half a dozen or a dozen healthcare systems in the way that you're describing them. The same way we have 3 airline systems in the United States, right? You might be, a diamond medallion on Delta, but you're a plebeian on United, right? And so why is that, right? Because they have their caterers, they have their tags, they have their lounges. And so I think we're going to see a bunch of those, because nearest neighbors in our system, right, are competitors, right? We put billboards next to Stanford. They put them next to us at UCSF. And so nearest neighbors in this ecosystem are competitors, but the nearest neighbor of the enemy of your enemy is my friend kind of thing might not be. And I see that kind of hopscotch someday making maybe half a dozen. I think Glenn Steele once taught me at a Geisinger we'll probably see a dozen of these in the United States when it's all rolled up someday.
Yeah, and just to expand the horizon a little bit, some of this pathology is uniquely U.S. I'm part of an innovative health initiative out of the EU where there's $2.4 billion, euros, sorry, they're about the same right now, on the table to talk about how can we effectively share information across silos, across sectors, across countries, so that we can do a better job of understanding health and wellness for the entire European population. I love that idea. I mean, if it harkens back to the talk before us where they were saying, well, the 4-minute mile was thought to be the peak performance of humans until you realize that, you should shoot beyond that. And this notion of everything is siloed, everybody's densely holding on to their little bit of healthcare information. I think that is unfortunately true, derived from, a capitalistic healthcare system that we have in this country that has had many positive outcomes, but some disastrous consequences. And I think we can look to other nations that are doing a better job. And in fact, I think if you look at the 11 OECD countries, every one of them is doing a better job than us in terms of returning value for money. And so I would like to imagine that we don't all have to live with a uniquely American pathology.
I'm just wondering if we could keep going on this one question, this one topic, but the one of the other topics this is starting to bleed into, and I think it would also be a great conversation to have, is the whole idea, as you're talking about silos, is the decentralization of healthcare, hospital at home. And let's just open that Pandora's box right now and talk about how feasible is that, and what is that truly going to look like?
I'm going to take the con side on this side. Anyone going to take the pro side? I know where Joe is too on this one. Anyone going to take the pro side on this stage for hospital at home?
Oh, it's so hard.
So I do think there's a pro in democratization, decentralization of healthcare, and it speaks to Josh's vision of where healthcare is going to go, that you can get some of it on demand, point of concern testing linked immediately to therapeutic access. I do think that's true. In full disclosure, I'm leaving here, flying to Barcelona for the World Hospital at Home Congress, and I'm keynoting the first day.
There's a little bit of pro.
and so it's something that we as BD track, because frankly, of the 45 billion products that we sold into healthcare, we sold most of those into hospitals. And so, not wanting to miss the Kodak moment, right? And so I think the numbers, though, speak to the size of the current challenge. I think with all of the hype and all of the dollars that went into hospital at home over the last several years, I think there were 17,000 admissions to hospitals at home in the U.S. last year, compared to the 32 million that got admitted to hospitals. And so if you're not in the finance industry, this is still decimal dust. And so, is it going to be something that some people want? Right now, the catalyst is the Medicare waiver that has paid hospital-level reimbursement for non-hospital level care, but I think that is necessarily transient.
So we have ambulatory at home now, right? Because of telehealth, right? That's certainly there, and we got remote patient monitoring, and those companies will come and go, and there'll be some value at some point for those. But I think we're going to reach hospital at home the same way, as long as it'll take to get an oil change at home, right? Yeah, some people change their own oil, but otherwise, or change my brakes at home, right? All that specialized equipment, right? I want to be with a Vinci robot, right? I don't see that fitting in a van, right? And so I think that's where a whole bunch of things are not going to be able to be done at home, the same way the specialized equipment and people are at a mothership at some point, right?
And not only the equipment, but, unfortunately I've had two elders who've had to go through very, difficult situations before their end of life. Helping someone get up from the bed to be able to do what they need to do, it just so many needs, bed sores turning, it's just, the oversight, even without the equipment, just the clinical decision making, in those, last months of your life, it's just hard to do really well. And in the nursing homes or in the hospital, they're just overwhelmed and they're not getting great care there. And so the drive is, let's get this person home, but it becomes a tremendous burden for the family. and especially for anybody with any caregiver background like me, and, become the chief physician in charge, and it just dominates your life. So it's just hard to imagine how, the decision-making part, sure, maybe that could be a little computer on the side, but man, all of the physical requirements and the decision-making, the very complex decision-making it's an quickly evolving disease state. It's just hard to imagine how that really, really works in the purest vision of it, unless someone's got a very simple issue, a routine infusion that needs to be managed or something like that you could see. But all the other things that are associated with really complex diseases that are sort of in that phase, it's hard to imagine how that really happens.
I actually would like to push back a little bit because I know that my pandemic experience was really, for me and for a lot of the people around me, was a return to what I think are some of the core things of focusing on your family and your community and faith. And so I think this notion of hospital at home is when you return to that, when you say, I have to take care of my family, I have to take care of the people around me, and that is part of my primary responsibility, that hospital at home really emerges as a really phenomenal vision. And I think I feel a little safe that we're probably not doing Da Vinci surgery at home anytime soon. Maybe not. I don't want to get in trouble either way on that one. But I do think for much of the care that you get in the hospital, we have the technologies to do the monitoring. We have the devices that can do the monitoring, and we have the technologies to tele-educate people and home caregivers. And I think a lot of people have gone back to saying, I can actually work from home, so I can take care of my aging parents. I can take care of my special needs child. I can actually contribute to my community and take care of the people that I care about around me. And so I think hospital at home, that there's a big future for that.
Okay, I'm going to take the opposite side on this one, which is I think this is the best example potentially of tech push that I've seen for digital, which is it's possible because digital can do it, but I think we're talking about a completely different fundamental need. In hospital care in the critically ill patient or someone who's chronically ill end of life is a very different problem than ambulatory access to care, preventative care, care when you're acutely sick. And I think that, the idea that the idea of what digital is can solve that spectrum. It's incredibly powerful. But I really feel like we're talking about taking the same tool and the same hammer and trying to potentially solve. I just think they're totally different problems.
I don't disagree, but I think there's a lot of space between critically ill
there is.
and ambulatory care. True. There's a huge space that people spend in the hospital that they do not need to be there, and they're at risk of getting sick.
Fair.
I'm just going to say, okay, so I think to be fair, we UC Irvine, we partnered with a company called Dispatch Health, where trying to get patients out the door sooner, right, who are otherwise stable, we can monitor them at home. And so critical things done at the hospital, then you pick up maybe more if the family's ready to take on some of that care and all. But I also want to say there is a huge distance also geographically between the home and the hospital. And that is covered by a CVS, a Walgreens, a Walmart Health, an Optum. Who knows what Optum's going to do next?
Dollar General.
Dollar
they have
General.
A CMO.
Yes, a chief medical. Yeah, exactly. So maybe we're thinking too literally about home, and there's the community, and there's all these community providers between us and that home too.
It's a spectrum. I mean, totally a spectrum. And I did take the end example. Sure. But I think that what digital will be for the ambulatory environment, everything else, and what it will be ultimately are completely different things. So we're throwing this giant umbrella, but the tools may be similar, but they're going to be applied in very different ways.
Yeah, in fact, I think the doctors are more replaceable than the nurses are. The nurses are actually more important because they're the ones who actually, and the doctor comes in and says, I think this and this. Nurse, take care of it. The nurse actually has to do all the physical interactions and all these things that, maybe robots could do.
Look what we saw. I mean, look what we saw in pandemic. It wasn't because of the shortage of doctors. It was really the shortage of nurses.
Absolutely. No, and if I was going to try to close this question, so I think the great question that's been asked is, hey, is care at home as safe as care in a hospital? And I love the inversion of that question. It's like whoever decided that hospitals were the safest form of healthcare. I mean, so if you were watching, I think the Wall Street Journal picked up a New England Journal of Medicine article by David Bates at the Brigham and said, there are 35 to 40 adverse events per 100 patients hospitalized. And so I don't think in any system you would imagine that that's as good as we can be. And so if this dialogue puts a little pressure on hospitals becoming safer because we're comparing it to the safety of the home and avoiding the delirium that you get in older people who get too many drugs, no sleep, and in a foreign environment, I think the opportunity to make hospitals safer is one of the great side effects of this delivery.
And there's a lot to learn from the Amish and the Mennonite population, who are your patients who come in and who are willing to pay for whatever care they deem necessary, but they also will push back and say, I don't really need to be in an ICU because I have a community member who is sitting at the bedside of that patient doing the monitoring that you're paying for and doing it better.
So I think we have time for maybe a rapid round on because we can't do a topic without we can't discuss digital innovation without at least going through and hearing from each of you on AI. And the question is, and I know I'm opening another Pandora's box because I don't know if we can get through this, but with AI, I think the big question is, are we there yet, or where are we on that journey to the evolved AI solutions in medtech? You want to go down?
I'm sure. Let's go quick.
Yes, no.
I think this is awesome. I know everybody's afraid of it. I think that we should be about afraid of it as we are for word processing. It's going to be an integrated thing into everything we do. And it's going to elevate, us as humans to do the things that we do best, and all the stuff that's sort of that somewhat differentiates people today will be level playing field. So I think it's going to be awesome. I love that it's going to be installed into a basic feature of Microsoft Word and everything. So most of your paper's written, and it's all about you to sort of how do you spice it up and make it you. That's great. Why do we have to do all the stuff that can be easily done and very well communicated? And let's focus on the incremental piece that we can only do best as humans.
Incredibly powerful tool, but I would say part of the solution, not the solution. So systems, connectivity, democratization of healthcare, all those things are essential, I think, to apply this piece of the solution.
Yeah, I've grown fatigued of the question of will AI replace clinicians, and instead firmly believe that clinicians who use AI will replace those who don't. In preparation for this talk, I have to give, I asked the generative AIs to draw me a picture of hospital at home, and it could. And I said, draw me a picture of remote monitoring, and it could. And I asked to draw a picture of chronic care for, of continuous care for chronic disease, and it could. And then I asked it to draw me a picture of electronic empathy, and it couldn't. Right, so I think healthcare has an emphasis on care, and that's given by people. The rest of this stuff is just going to be a helpful tool.
I'm both even more optimistic and more pessimistic at the same time here, because I think I've just been blown away with just off-the-shelf tools right now like ChatGPT and how well they can understand our progress notes, sometimes better than our own oncologists at this point. I think, and that's just GPT-3. We got 4 now. We can train it with our own notes now. So I think in some ways we might be entering an arms race quickly of who can build out the best models to understand what patients are going through, right? We have all this digital data, right, in our EHRs, and payers want to know, providers want to know, summarization tools, what would you do next? What would you do next on this patient if you were Bob Wachter? What would you do next on this patient if you were Sloan Kettering, right? Or what would you do next on this patient if you were United Health, right? And so I think the same way you can get it to sing a song as a rap singer, right? I mean, you can do all that today. So I think all that's going to happen. Is that going to be useful? Who knows? I love the empathy side of it, no doubt about it. But telehealth, again, we keep doing this to ourselves as a physician community. And I think, when you're comfortable and, in fact, desiring of a random doc within 60 seconds, explain to me where the empathy was there. Because I think we're just putting ourselves out of a business here. Yes, I love the empathy side, but it's a $4 trillion market. And I can see people trying to chase and trying to capture some of those dollars. So I think it's here now. And boy, that thing learns faster than any med student can. So.
Excellent. Well, I would agree. I'm optimistic, but I'm just optimistic. That's the way that I am. I worked for IBM Watson Health, and so they have AI solutions for all the stakeholders in the healthcare ecosystem. So there were AI tools that could detect fraud in claims databases and identify targets for drug discovery and provide clinical decision support. So I think we're there. There are solutions. I think I would have sort of one caution and one idea. I think there, as Todd mentioned early in this discussion, there are a lot of tedious tasks in healthcare that need automation, and not all tedious tasks that need automation need AI to do it. So there are a lot of things that we can improve that don't necessarily need AI. Second, I think one of the biggest concerns of any healthcare executive right now is that staffing and that burnout, and they're related. And I think one of the best ways that we can use AI is, again, to potentially put data and insights in the hands of clinicians and help them do their job better, or help them learn and develop. Yep. And what was very striking when I left academic practice and went to industry is there was this new attention to me and my talent development. What do you want to learn, and how do you want to grow? And there is none of that in a busy clinical practice if someone is getting you to see more patients, nor is there in an academic practice, even though they pride themselves in training programs. There's not a lot of emphasis once you're in practice of how would you like to learn and grow and improve your skill. So I think we can use some of these AI tools to give people, put in their clinical workflows, tools for them to, at a small level every day, do a little learning and growth. And there is nothing more invigorating or a better solution for that burnout than for people to be able to learn and grow.
Well said. And I just want to, I think we are right at time here, and I just want to thank everyone for coming and early this morning. And I want to, on behalf of Veranex, thank you so much. This is the easiest panel I've ever had to moderate. You're putting me out of a job here. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.